Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. There. So first off, thank you so much for coming to our first of hopefully many TBM forums. This is something that we've been thinking about for the last couple of months, and we truly appreciate you guys coming here on site. We appreciate the online. It looks like we have 17 people so far coming online. So for us, this is really about spreading the knowledge, sharing best practices. This forum is really about you. It's not about us. It's about sharing kind of your TBM journey, if you've been on one or if you're thinking about going on one. So, I think I have some feedback here from Gerry. This is really about just kind of bringing everyone together. We were thinking about maybe doing this maybe once a month, but for now we were doing every couple months. And if you're virtual, you might want to mute your phone. Okay, there. There you go. All right. He threw me off a little bit there. So, geez. All right. So if you're using Zoom online, a couple things. One is you all are on mute. So my apologies, but everyone's on mute. And for the people in the room, you are not on mute. But we will have Q&A after Gerry's presentation, along after Chad's presentation. We do have chat available on Zoom. So part of this is to be able to collaborate with others. So if you have feedback you want to give, if you have links, case studies, feel free to jump in the chat room and be able to collaborate. Video is disabled for this forum on purpose. Hopefully in the future we'll open it up, but we wanted to kind of save the bandwidth. If you have any issues, go ahead on Zoom, raise your hand, and Kristen will jump in there and she'll do a private chat with you. So.
All right. This is Chad. I'm just getting set up here. And I'm going to take over for a second, and I'm going to hand off to Gerry. Let me sit down. That'll work for us.
Yeah, let me unmute Gerry there. All right, go ahead.
All right, so just a few words. Hopefully everybody online can hear me. Good afternoon, and I guess good morning for many of you that might be out across the country. This is our inaugural meeting of the TBM Executive Advisory Forum, so thank you all for coming. This is the first, as Tim was talking about, this is the first of what we hope will be many informative events for us. There's been enormous interest. Since we created this forum, we've already had over 200 people join, and that was in less than a month. So it's very new, but also seems to be generating a lot of interest. Before we really jump into the presentation, I just wanted to take a moment. I did want to recognize a couple of supporters that have participated with us in the formation of the forum. The TBM Council, which is the standard bearer for technology within the industry, and Aptio, the leading TBM solution provider in the TBM space, have both been instrumental in shaping this for us. We very much appreciate their continued support, advice, and inspiration as we drive value for you guys as a group. The topic today, I think, if any of you had a chance to see it, is about TBM value realization. And we've said, you've polished the car, now it's time to drive it. And that's really a fun way of us saying what I think probably many of you understand is that it can be a lot of work, or it will be a lot of work to implement TBM. And now it's time to really start realizing the value from TBM. We believe few organizations have demonstrated such a value achievement as to the extent that Gerry Imhoff and his team at Maritz have accomplished. Many of you may know Gerry as a TBM Council leadership board member and as CIO and VP of IT services at Maritz. And he's here today. He's going to be sharing his journey with you, in the TBM journey with you. So with that, I'll hand off to Gerry. Gerry, welcome.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. Can you give me a quick audio check? Sound good? Awesome. Outstanding. So again, thank you, and good morning and or afternoon, depending upon your time zone. I am going to jump right into it because we've got about 15 or 20 minutes for my part. First, I guess one of the questions is going to be, why can't I change slides? That's my first question. So that's interesting. Well, golly. Well, okay. So talk amongst yourselves for a moment here. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Sorry about that, everybody. Anyway, so one question you may have is, who is Maritz? We're 124. This will be our 125th anniversary year. We started as a jewelry and watch manufacturer, and I'll tell a very short story about how we reinvented ourselves because jewelry and watches weren't selling so well. But at the heart of our business is a strict people focus, both internally and externally with our customers. Speaking of customers, this is just a quick logo slide. It would be really busy if I added the couple hundred that are actually our customers, but you'll recognize a number of those logos. And what we do, I'll quickly go through this as well. If you have a credit card in your pocket, that credit card probably earns points. And there's about a 70% chance that when you go to redeem those points, you're hitting databases in our data center or in our cloud services that you can redeem those for an iPad or whatever you're going to get, a new set of golf clubs or what have you. We do customer sat. So if you stay at a major hotel chain or buy a new car or things like that and get a survey, whether it's in the US mail or a web-based survey or whatever, there's a really good chance we're behind that. We do events. We don't do the TBM conference, but we hope to someday. We do things like Microsoft Tech Ed, and as well as a number of other services in adjacent markets. So I mentioned that we reinvented ourselves. The reason we had to do that is, remember, we were a watch manufacturing company, and the Great Depression hit, and the owner of the company at that time, a guy named Edward Maritz, he couldn't sell the watches, right? Nobody had money to buy them. So he came up with the idea of, hey, why don't we just give them away? And if you're familiar with the practice of an employee receiving a gold watch on their 25th anniversary, or salespeople getting non-cash incentives when they meet sales goals, things like that, that was our current CEO's great-great-grandfather's idea. So Maritz truly is the grandfather of the incentive business. Interesting parallel, if you will. About 5 years ago, my organization, we had been a centralized IT shared service for about 14 years. And we, much like Maritz in the Great Depression, were facing irrelevancy due to a significant loss of customers, which were our internal business unit customers. So we had to figure out a way to reinvent ourselves and help our customers realize value. And a couple of ways to depict this, we thought we were the cat's meow, the silly graphic there, but our customers just didn't see the value. We weren't jerks, but we acted perhaps like, many of your organizations used to, or many organizations do. We acted like we were the technology experts, and we were, but, we acted like, hey, we know what's best. Kind of like that old Saturday Night Live skit, hey, move over, I'll fix it. I'm the expert. We felt our customers really didn't need options because we set the standards. And if you look at our staff, we hired for technical prowess, just period, right? And new people would come into the organization, and they might have had great ideas, but at the time we prided ourselves on our organization being ISO certified. So we had these awesome processes, and new people would just get forced into ISO certified process submission by coworkers who've been here 20 years, kind of like that's the way we've always done it, just flip your burgers. But several years ago, when we began to realize that what we'd become and where we needed to go, one of my direct reports described where we were as the machine. And I really like this picture because it reminds me of where we were. We were just really a crusty old set of cogs that just cranked away. And if somebody tried to stop the machine, they'd just get crushed. So an interesting side note is, at that time, our knock had a wall that was hidden from the general public's view, and they called it the wall of shame, because all of us, including the NOC, were really great at playing the victim. And that wall of shame listed people on other teams and our customers who they felt made their lives difficult. We really did have too many jerks, but we tolerated them due to that technical prowess I mentioned. And the people, you roll your eyes when they enter a room, or if you get assigned a project that they're on, you're just not looking forward to it. But the fact is, nobody, including us at the time, ever did anything about them. So along about that time, two other things happened. The first of which is we had basically our customers just didn't see value in our services, and they started revolting. Frankly, they got with our CEO, Steve Maritz, who's the watch manufacturer's great-great-grandson, and they complained that we were too expensive, we were inflexible, just not good to work with. So at that time, consultants came in. We all love when consultants come in. I'm not talking about Advocate. I'm talking about the big four or whatever the big are now. And of course, they advised our CEO that the best thing for him to do would be to decentralize most corporate functions, including IT. We had a pretty large corporate center then. It was over $100 million, about $55 million of it was IT. And oh, by the way, the consultant said, before you do that, IT is just too expensive. So trim it 35% before you decentralize it. So that was a pretty fun time. And actually, that was right about the time that I became CIO. My old boss basically said, I don't really want to stick around for that fun. And he left. But I want to do a quick commercial. So last year, my team had about 4 seconds of fame on Mad Money when Sonny Gupta from Aptio appeared with Jim Cramer. And you'll see very clearly that in that very blurry circle in the background, that's me. But when I saw that on TV, that really made me realize that I wasn't hearing Aptio correctly. I thought they had always said their software would enable us to optimize about 35%, not 3 to 5%. So we were stupid enough to go ahead and reduce 35% over a 4-year period, which actually was pretty cool. And of course, I'm kidding. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but this shows our overall expense improvement. Again, we started at about $50 million, got it down to about 30. The only points I want to make on this slide are number one, in that left box there, it says prior 12 years, we had been cutting about $1 million a year, which is roughly 2%, 2 or 3% for the prior 10 years. So we weren't fiscally irresponsible. We still looked to save money all the time. But something I'm actually incredibly proud of my team about, the most recent 2 fiscal years, even after we cut 40%, we're still finding ways to save so we can reinvest millions of dollars. In particular, the last couple of years, we've invested about $3 of that $4 million we've saved in additional security, which who among us does not need to improve their security? And we've done that, as you can see, those last couple of fiscal years while our budgets remain flat. It's not all about expenses, but your customers certainly like it when expenses reduce or their cost reduces. I understand this subject can be somewhat taboo on this slide. I certainly don't want to come across cold-hearted. As a matter of fact, I'm extremely people-oriented, and things like this cause me heartache. But in order to succeed, we realized we had to change out some people. Remember that machine, right? But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let me explain a little further. How do we do it? We started by defining our target culture. That graphic in the upper right, there's a larger depiction of it on my next slide, and it's not overly important, just to make my point. But we said, okay, what do we want to be from a culture perspective? Next, we started with the management team. I think that's vitally important, because if your managers are not on board, I don't know that they're going to consciously subvert things, but I think unconsciously they may. In other words, kind of, hey, we've always done it this way. Why change? A perception that it's worked in the past. But we got our managers on board. And then both my leadership team and all our managers, this is, we coached like our work lives depended on it, because frankly, they did. Remember, there was an outcry in the business. They wanted to run things themselves. We felt that was not the right way to do it. And so if we didn't reinvent ourselves, we were going to get decentralized out of business. And when you coach people, ultimately people are going to be willing or they're not going to be willing. We worked with the willing. And again, we coached everybody, but if people weren't going to make it, going back to that prior slide, we had to swap them out. And one of the things we found was generally speaking, if you have two C players, many times you can replace them with one A player and get more work done than the two C players perform. So that was kind of our mode. If we couldn't coach people up to be a solid B, if not an A, we really worked with them to say, hey, your future is probably not with us. And finally, what we did is that we made sure we empowered people. I understand that's a buzzword. Then held them accountable and used Aptio in particular to help us drive the change we were looking for. And when I talk about empowered and accountable, one of the points I want to make is somebody shared with me not all that long ago, I think it was on LinkedIn. I really didn't think much of Steve Jobs as a person. I think he was kind of a jerk. And so I didn't research this, but somebody posted a meme about Steve Jobs. Whether he said it or not, I don't know. I just like the saying. And it was something along the lines of, why would I hire great people and great technical minds and tell them what to do? I want them to tell me what to do. And when I look at our journey over the past couple of years, we used to have a very hierarchical top-down approach to where the managers would set direction and different things like that. And we would really stifle the innovation and creativity in our organization. We reversed that, and we made sure that managers got out of the way. Managers just coach people on the approach they use and the perception others have from that approach, and coach to that, and then let them do their awesome technical stuff unencumbered. I mentioned I would show this. I think it's certainly more than a poster on the wall. And, if you look back 10 or 15 years ago when we would try to do transformation activities, we'd put a poster on the wall and then we'd forget we had that poster on the wall. But the thing that changed for us is, back to that previous slide, we believed in this and we coached to it. So if somebody wasn't showing those values or displaying those values in their approach of job knowledge, judgment, communication, passion, integrity, and having impact, we coached them up or frankly out. Again, I don't want to sound cold about that, but that was key to our success. And what I want to say about this is, we were lucky enough, Chad mentioned that we are TBM council members. We were lucky enough last year in November to be named a finalist in the business alignment category at the TBM conference. We were further fortunate to be chosen as the winner actually in that category. But as part of that evaluation process, we put some of our customers in front of the review board. It was a KPMG managed review board. And in the write-up, KPMG subsequently provided us about our nomination as well as our winning that award. They featured these quotes from our customers. And I don't know how visible they are on the screen, but they really represent the transition we have made in showing value to our customers. A couple of those there, they have clear visibility into what they're consuming. We've managed to introduce true drivers of spend. So if they pull a lever, whether it's increasing or decreasing their consumption, it increases or decreases spend. We've tremendously increased the visibility and really relationship building with the individuals. We have an expectation for every single person on my team to get away from the keyboard and away from their desk and go and meet and develop a relationship with their customers. And that has just really made all the difference in the world. I could go on for hours, frankly, regarding the role Aptio played in particular, or how partners like Advocate can accelerate your progress. I certainly recommend using a partner. But I will close and open it up to questions by just saying I'm really proud of my team for getting us to move from where we were with that ugly machine to a point where our customers are outspoken advocates, no pun intended, I don't know, maybe a little pun intended, of the value that our customers now realize from their partnership with us. So two closing thoughts. I'm happy to entertain your questions. And secondly, if we don't get through all the questions or if anybody has any specific follow-ups, certainly reach out to Advocate and they can get you in touch with me. I'm happy to do that.
So everyone online, feel free to raise your hand if you have questions out there, and we'll try to read them off in the time that Gerry has with us. I did have a few questions, Gerry, that we had sort of picked up on prior to you actually speaking. And of course, anybody who's here in person, feel free to physically raise your hand, and we can ask some questions of you as well, or answer some questions for you. So Gerry, one question that came up was, what was the biggest barrier to overcome from a TBM perspective?
I think the biggest barrier was, as an organization, we were professionals at playing the victim. So nothing was our fault. We had stupid users, developers wrote crappy code, that type of stuff. We never. I guess it's the old adage: when you point a finger at someone, there's four fingers pointing back at you. We finally realized that, and if you look at, I cannot overemphasize the value of good performance management and true transparent feedback. And when I've given a presentation like this before, I usually start out with an audience poll, and I'll just give you a quick mental visualization of that. The first thing I do is say, okay, if you're a manager in the room, how good do you think the feedback that you give employees is, and how actionable is it, and how much does it really help them improve? And managers say, on a scale of 5, they'll typically say, 4, maybe some of them 5. And then the next question I ask is, okay, everybody's an employee, right? Whether you're a manager or not, you're an employee. And then also some people in the room are not managers at all. And I say, okay, now you rate the feedback you get from your manager, and as far as how much it really helps you grow, and and timeliness and the amount you get. And invariably, employees say, oh no, I get no feedback from my manager. And so obviously those two things don't equate. So we are ridiculously focused on timely and transparent feedback. And the way you can measure whether you are giving good feedback is if you get really nervous, almost scared to tell somebody what you're about to tell them, because that tells you you're telling them what they need to hear. And the way you can tell if you're receiving good feedback, frankly, is if you get pissed off when you hear it, because it's hard to hear. But once you stop playing the victim and start internalizing that and say, okay, they might have something here, maybe I need to modify my approach, that's when the magic happens.
Thank you, Gerry. And I don't know if you can see or not, I'll read the questions here as we go, but Kevin Swatala had a question. Did you bring anyone from the business and operations into IT full-time to help drive engagement? And if so, was that successful?
So we didn't, I'm going to say, proactively transfer people. It just turns out that Maritz is affords a lot of mobility internally. And so we did have people that came out of the business that were already naturally in our group. And then it's cross-pollination too. We have people move out of our organization into the business. So that existed. But the one thing we did is, instead of just assuming we had all the answers and knew what our customers wanted, and again, this sounds very, Pollyanna-ish, but we really, frankly, forced our way onto their table initially, so we could develop a good partnership. And just over the course of time, again, we kind of practiced that same transparent feedback thing I was talking about that we did internally with employees. We practiced that with our businesses. And just once you get to a point where there's kind of no secrets and nobody's scared to say anything, that's a magical moment when your business partners begin to trust you and you become vulnerable and say, hey, we know we're not very good at this, but we'd certainly love your assistance in getting better.
Got you. Well, thank you for that. And there's I think we have time, hopefully, Gerry, for one more question. And I saw that Sherry Jordan online had asked a question about how did you get to a set of common definitions of a B player versus a C player? You'd referenced that as you were going through and looking at the labor statistics in terms of your transition.
That is a phenomenal. It's probably the best question I've ever been asked. So that's great. But I also know the answer because I lived it. So what we do is, and we've done this now for a couple of years, on a twice a year basis, my entire management team gets together and we review every single employee's performance. We, about 5 minutes or so on every single employee. And when we first started doing that, again, remember what I referenced about eye roll. And when we first started doing that, we'd have, it's all about different expectations, and everybody has different expectations. And the first thing we had to do was normalize expectations, and we want them to be high expectations. But in going through those reviews, one manager would talk about one of their employees as if they walked on water, and everybody in the room would like roll their eyes and say, no, we know that person, they're a jerk. And we just had to get to a point where we talked about it. And again, that's really, really hard at first, but it gets a lot easier. And I'm really not exaggerating when I say those first meetings we'd schedule for 4 hours to talk about 200 people, and we'd end up going like 3 days, 4 hours each. And now those discussions take, I don't know, probably about an hour to get through 125 people, because everybody knows everybody, because we've developed relationships. And now we've got to a point where we have level set expectations, and people know if they come into a room and they try to BS people about what their folks are like, they're going to get called out on it. So that it's a painstaking process, but it pays huge dividends.
Well, fantastic. Gerry, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you needed to leave at 12:30, so thank you very much for that presentation. I'm sure everybody found it very insightful. Certainly, as a group that is so deep into this and has had such experience with it, your insights are just invaluable. So thank you very much, Gerry.
Yeah, thanks for the time, and thanks for everybody's attention. And again, I'll reiterate that happy to do any follow-ups if you want to get a hold of me through Advocate. So appreciate your time, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, so we had a few extra minutes because we knew that Gerry was on a relatively short timeline in terms of his presentation. So one of the things that we are going to do here, and we'd like to do in our future meetings as well, is just help bring it back and make sure that we're all, finding the value in what we're talking about as we have various presenters come in and talk. One of the things that we thought we might just talk about is the value side of the equation, because what you heard a lot of, and I'm sure if you're in the room thinking about TBM, we know about cost transparency, we know about spend visibility and driving the cost savings. Gerry talked about a lot of that in terms of the starting point, and we know that IT cost reduction is usually a starting point for this. In fact, it's probably always going to be a core component of TBM. But one of the things we wanted to put it in perspective overall is that, that benefit of and that value of cost reduction is part of a continuum and part of an overall set of things ranging from maybe even further to the left, things like legacy refresh and IT quality and productivity, things that are very low level, very IT centric, all the ways you start getting up into business cost reductions, profitability, customer profitability, product profitability, increasing revenue, and even you can imagine to the furthest right, the new lines of business. And so as we think about this, the benefits associated with these different types of things really tends to scale as you start moving to the right. As you start to see, you've got, some of the things are missing from the picture, but you can see the scaling that occurs where you start to, the value of a technology investment. When you invest dollars to save dollars, very important, and it's something everybody has to do, but it tends to pay a dollar for a dollar save, or you spend a dollar, you're saving dollars. But when you're able to invest those and drive ROI or drive some of the increase in revenue, new markets and other things, the value becomes much greater. And as we look, of course, CIOs, the technology team, really is responsible for supporting and driving all of those different business outcomes for the enterprise. It's just incumbent upon the technology organization to do that. And while we think about some of the investments to the right being those discretionary spending items, which are always in short supply, that component of the spend that can be invested in growth and transformation of the company, it's about balancing across all of these. Some of the peers in the organization, like the CFO, the CEO, the board of directors, will tend to have a more limited view of where the value is really coming from. Their attention span gets a lot longer as you start talking about more of the value to the right. And so as we think about TBM and the principles of TBM, the savings, identifying those savings, but looking for ways to reinvest those savings ultimately to drive ROI and other outcomes to the right-hand side of this. It's really about that full process. And it's about looking at, just highlighting some of these, it's about looking at the entire spectrum. And so we've got to begin the journey at the IT cost reduction end typically, but it's really about finding a mechanism for going all the way through. I'm going to see if this kind of works here. Interesting. Okay, so when we think about TBM today, a lot of the standards that are in place really are empowering some of the left-hand side of that. We've got the standards from the TBM Council in terms of cost models and standard atom models, things like that. But as we go through and continue to advance into the future, we'll see more and more of that standardization start to address these outcomes and enterprise outcomes to the right. This forum, the reason we're sharing all this is that this forum is about both. It's really about the journey both from cost center and managing, as Gerry described, looking at that, reducing the costs, decentralizing the organization, and driving from that perspective all the way through more of that strategic partner where now they are helping the organization make more strategic investments in the outcomes. When we think about this journey, of course, we'll spend time on the savings end of the scale, where we're allocating costs to towers and determining TCO of our different components, whether that's applications or our infrastructure or others. What we also are hoping that our forum can be focusing on is how are people reinvesting and how are people using the framework of TBM to determine ROI, reprioritize projects and programs based on that ROI, really drive new metrics, track the new metrics, track the KPIs, and then define the responsibilities of TBM organizations and how this is going to function within the organization. So it's all of those things. I just wanted to kind of put this at the end of what Gerry was talking about and set the table that, really both aspects of this should be in focus for the forum. So let me pause. Of course, Gerry's had to step off the line, but I'll open the floor up for any questions in general about TBM, anything that Tim or I can answer. Maybe there's others in the room that will want to chime in and talk about your experiences in the TBM space or online. But I'll pause and see if anybody has any other questions.
I think we've got to ask the audience if they want to do Q&A, so we'll ask you guys. Anyone in here have any questions about kind of the value of TBM or what Gerry talked about? And feel free, if you're online, feel free to go ahead and submit a question. Kevin still.
We had a couple of questions that did come up beforehand. We just jotted them down, and I'll ask Tim to answer one here. Tim, someone earlier before we got started asked, what are the biggest barriers for adopting TBM?
I think, I've been doing this for 10 years, so I would say that the biggest barrier is going to be culture. I think the technology is going to be there, the process, but it's really how do you change the culture of the organization, because you're starting to move away from creating unique architectures. So now we're starting to create joint development. We're starting to move away from kind of being in our siloed organization. So now we're going to have to work as a services team. So the architecture team is now going to have to work with the applications team, with the network team. So the biggest shock is really, collaboration is really key to being successful with TBM. And part of that is not only with the business, but just within IT. How do we change the mindset just within IT about value? And I know, at Cisco, we thought about the value of IT was how we manage our projects. And it wasn't until we started to have that services view that we actually realized that the value that we actually deliver is through a collection of services, where a project or a program is just the promise of value. And so trying to get the organization to kind of have that services-centric approach and be able to say, well, gosh, my service is dependent on these services and vice versa. What services do I depend on to be able to deliver the service end to end. So I think that the biggest one is the culture change, and I think Gerry talked about it. I think TBM has to be a top-down approach. If there's ever a time for your CIO or your CFO to have a command and control approach, I think it's truly behind trying to implement, not only to adopt TBM, but to hopefully optimize the TBM journey. So I think the culture is the big one.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Another question that came up earlier was someone had quoted that the average lifespan of a CIO is around 18 months, which seems short to me. Maybe it's a little bit longer hopefully it's a little longer than that. But the question was, what are the key areas to focus on leveraging TBM if you're a CIO and trying to, I guess, presumably extend the lifespan? One of the things that were, I mentioned as I was just kind of teeing up a couple of these last minute comments, I think is really value. There's a virtually every aspect of the business, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but virtually every aspect of the business is enabled through technology investment. And so there's just more and more demand on CIOs and their teams to be enabling the business to grow, to differentiate, and to drive different competitive positioning in the marketplace. And there's always been precious few resources to go invest in that. It's, a lot of times we'll see the 75-25 split or the 80-20, or even in many cases, we're seeing 90-10 splits between the amount of investment a company is spending on keeping the lights on or running the business versus the amount of money that they can actually invest in transformation. And so when we think about the value that the CIO needs to bring and presumably extend their stay at the company, it's really to identify what those, how can they leverage TBM to really shift that ratio and start driving greater outcomes for the business, increase the amount of demand for IT that they can consume from their limited resources, aka the budget.
I'll add on to that. I think it's also sometimes we get stuck behind, we just think of TBM as cost savings. I think part of it, with the CIOs trying to tell with the business is, how do you tell the full end-to-end story of a service? So how do I tie in not only the cost of a service, but other metrics like quality, risk, leverage and reuse, user experience? How do you actually bring all those components together and be able to tell the full story of the value of a service? It's beyond just cost. Cost is a major component of TBM, but you have to be able to look at all the other core metrics.
One last question I see here. You talked about one of them. There was a question earlier on how long have you seen customers take to get initial value out of TBM? So it depends. There is what we're seeing is a rapid implementation to get to a point where you're operational with TBM. That can be measured in a matter of months, less than a quarter, to actually get the information flowing, to start taking that data that you were prior to a TBM program was all trapped in Excel spreadsheets and all that cost tracking and the different performance metrics that are in Excel, and getting that into tools and other things that put it more at your fingertips, like Apptio. That can happen quickly. You can get that information in and you begin to get insights from that right away. Over the next year, you're probably implementing then just getting better and better views to that data, layering on additional data sets and insights to that so that you can start to tag information and see different aspects of data coming along. So that will tend to happen over the coming year and continue to evolve even beyond that. I suspect that Gerry would tell you he's still finding ways to leverage the TBM frameworks to continue to drive new and different ways of identifying value. Yes?
Are there particular barriers in a heavily outsourced IT environment?
So the question came up in the room is that were there any barriers to?
A heavily outsourced.
A heavily outsourced environment. Tim, you want to take that one?
That's a good question.
This is Chad. I'll answer. I'll take a swag at it. So from an outsourced environment, if we're thinking of implementing the TBM program within a company, there's actually opportunities to outsource the TBM program as well, where we're seeing people an interest in having others manage this program for them. So there is opportunities if your standard operating model is to outsource. There can be opportunities where you can have others come in and manage this for you. If it's a question of getting data into your system from an outsourced, more of a heavily outsourced environment, it depends on how much you're actually able to measure and track in the source data for being able to capture the cost and transparency.
So we have a core of employees who are IT, but the bulk of our IT is outsourced, both infrastructure hosting, network management, and application dev and support is outsourced to a third-party provider. And thinking through that, I'm wondering if it is more or less difficult to change both the culture, because you now have two cultures. You have your own internal culture and you have the culture of the outsource provider.
From a cultural perspective, the internal, the TBM can be very consistent in terms of what you're looking at. Typically, in a heavily outsourced culture, there's a strong bias towards cost savings, cost reduction, and TBM can be highly consistent with that. From the outsourcing provider's perspective, being able to provide that, as we look at cloud providers and others if you think in terms of data center and cloud provisioning, there is a lot of available information that they're trying to provide. And if you've seen it, you probably have experienced, it's overwhelming amounts of information, frankly. And there is a willingness to start tagging and identifying how those assets and those components are being used so that they can be tracked and managed. TBM can support that. In terms of willingness to adapt and provide some of that additional information or support the TBM program, that can vary. We've seen it be highly collaborative, where some of the telecom providers, for example, and others are providing additional information to support the TBM program and help provide greater transparency there.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. And the reason why I kind of went, because it's a loaded question, because as a best practice, any service that you're outsourcing, we had this concept of a service owner, someone that's the general manager of their service. I would never want a consultant to be a service owner, an external vendor to be a service owner. You would want somebody in IT who owns that. However, they can be dependent on that outsourced resource, but it's really important not to have any third parties, because you don't want to have the IP of a service outside of the organization. The second point is, one of the hardest things that we see a lot of customers when they start to track labor is outsourced labor. Because a lot of times, a lot of customers will start to load data in through their cost model, but they don't know which project or which service those customers are associated to. So it's kind of a peanut butter spread approach. So one of the lessons learned is, as you start to create your SOWs, you start to associate projects, start to really nail down exactly which service or which project those vendors are supporting, and then that will actually increase your cost transparency. A lot of times people will pull in POs and SOWs, and it's a guessing game. I think they're working on X, Y, and Z. I don't really know. And again, as part of the journey of costing, part of TBM is, you kind of peel back the onion of your organization. You kind of uncover things that, might need improvement. I think one of the core areas is definitely how you track your vendors and your offshore resources.
I don't know if we could see if there's any I want to make sure we're watching for any from the outside. Any other questions? No. Well, wonderful. I am going to just click on a couple more here and then hand off to Tim. Give me here, I think, probably. So thank you all for attending this initial event of the TBM Executive Advisory Forum. Just the goal of the forum, as we originally set it up, was to really bring together folks such as yourself and generate that look at best practices, industry trends, and talk about methodologies and approaches. And really, the idea is to allow and provide a collaboration between you guys, and for us to be facilitating that as much as we can. Keep in mind, a lot of this is around value realization. This is a lot of work to get to a cost visibility, but then the natural next question is going to be, how do we help drive value? So it's a hard question, and it's one that we are really hoping that the forum can help address.